There's a plant growing through the rusted chain-link fence behind an abandoned rail yard in Baltimore right now. Purple-stemmed, serrated leaves, small pink flowers that look like they belong in a grandmother's garden, not wedged between gravel and broken concrete. Nobody stops, nobody bends down. But that plant, motherwort, has been prescribed by midwives, carried by herbalists through plagues, and validated by German regulatory commissions for heart palpitations and anxiety. The World Health Organization acknowledges that 80% of the developing world still relies on traditional plant medicine, and across nearly every culture, women were the ones who kept that knowledge alive. Grandmothers prescribed it. Battlefield nurses packed it. Modern clinical trials are now confirming what they already knew. One of the plants on this list is the direct ancestor of the birth control pill. Another was so effective for bleeding that combat medics adopted it. From midwives, you've been walking past a pharmacy your whole life. You want to know the plant that practically every midwife in recorded European history kept within arm's reach? It wasn't exotic, it wasn't expensive, it wasn't locked behind a pharmacy counter. It was red raspberry leaf, the midwife's tea. And if you've ever seen a raspberry bush growing wild along a fence line or at the edge of a forest clearing, you've walked past one of the oldest birth preparation herbs on the planet. The leaves are soft and slightly fuzzy on the underside, bright green with serrated edges, and when you crush them between your fingers, they release a faintly grassy, almost black tea scent. European midwives brewed this into tea for pregnant women for centuries. Native American traditions independently arrived at the same practice. Cherokee and Iroquois women used raspberry leaf preparations during the final weeks before birth. The reason it works comes down to a compound called fragarine, combined with a rich tannin profile which appears to tone smooth muscle tissue in the uterus, not forcing contractions, toning. Think of it like a warm-up routine for a muscle that's about to do the hardest work of its life. A systematic review published in the Journal of Midwifery and Women's Health found that women who consumed raspberry leaf tea in the third trimester had shorter second stages of labor and lower rates of forceps delivery. That's not folk superstition. That's outcome data confirming what midwives documented for generations. But here's the quiet tragedy of this plant. It's too simple, too cheap, too deeply associated with women's birth work to attract pharmaceutical interest. You can grow it in your backyard. You can dry the leaves in a paper bag. You can brew it for pennies. And that's exactly why it got sidelined. Not because it didn't work, but because nobody could profit from it. Red raspberry leaf is like a personal trainer that's been working for free since the Middle Ages. The fact that it's still one of the most recommended herbs by certified nurse midwives today tells you everything. Modern medicine didn't improve on it, it just forgot to mention it. And if a plant this simple has this much documented power, you have to start asking, what else got forgotten? That question leads us straight to the plant growing through the crumbling stone wall nobody's looked at twice. Motherwort, the anxious mother's calm. And its name alone tells you who it was made for. Leonuris cardiaca. The Latin literally translates to lion-hearted. It grows in rubble, in neglected garden borders, along old stone foundations where the mortar's crumbling. The stems are square, that's how you know it's a mint family member, and the leaves are deeply lobed, almost like dark green hands reaching outward. Touch them and they feel slightly rough, almost bristled. Smell the crushed leaves, and you get a sharp, bitter green scent that's not pleasant but is unmistakable. Greek physicians prescribed motherwort for heart palpitations over 2,000 years ago. Chinese medicine used it. They call it yi mu kao, on literally benefit mother herb. For postpartum recovery and menstrual regulation, two civilizations thousands of miles apart arriving at the same conclusion. This plant calms the racing heart and settles the anxious body, especially in women during and after pregnancy. The compound responsible is leonorine, an alkaloid that research has shown to have mild sedative and uterine toning effects. The German Commission E, one of the most rigorous herbal regulatory bodies in the world, approved motherwort specifically for nervous cardiac conditions and thyroid-related agitation. That's not a folk endorsement, that's a government-backed pharmaceutical commission saying, yes, this works. And yet most people walking past it today would call it a weed. They'd pull it out of their garden without a second thought. Motherwort got erased because it addressed something the modern medical system was slow to take seriously: postpartum anxiety, hormonal unrest, the racing heart that shows up in perimenopause and gets dismissed as stress. Women knew what it did. They passed it down through kitchen gardens and whispered recommendations. The clinical world just took 2 millennia to catch up. Think of motherwort as a grandmother who was right all along. Calm, steady, growing in the cracks where nobody thought to look. If this one surprises you, the next one is even more hidden. Lady's mantle, the alchemist's cloak, is one of the most beautiful plants you've never noticed. Alchemilla vulgaris grows low to the ground in temperate meadows and along shaded garden edges across Europe. Its leaves are scalloped like a pleated fan, soft as felt, and they do something almost magical at dawn. They collect single perfect droplets of water at their center, it gathered not from rain but from the plant's own guttation process. Medieval alchemists believed those droplets held special properties. They called the water celestial water and used it in preparations they thought could transmute base metals. They were wrong about the alchemy, but they were right about the plant. Lady's mantle was a cornerstone of European women's herbalism for menstrual regulation and wound healing. Its tannin-rich profile makes it a powerful astringent, meaning it tightens tissues and reduces bleeding. Midwives used it for excessive menstrual flow. Herbalists recommended it after childbirth for tissue recovery. In Scandinavian and Alpine traditions, young women gathered it specifically during certain phases of their cycle, believing it supported reproductive health. Modern phytochemical analysis confirms the tannin density, and studies on its astringent and anti-inflammatory properties have validated those traditional applications. One study published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology highlighted its significant wound healing activity in vitro. But here's what happened. When synthetic hormones arrived in the mid-20th century, plant-based menstrual support became irrelevant to the pharmaceutical model. Why prescribe a common meadow plant when you could prescribe a patented pill? Lady's mantle didn't stop working. It stopped being necessary to the system that profits from complexity. It's still there in alpine meadows, still collecting its morning dewdrops, still carrying those tannins. People just stopped asking it for help. Lady's mantle is like a master seamstress living next door to a fast fashion factory. Overqualified, overlooked, and quietly better at the job. Now here's one that shifts the conversation from gardens to battlefields. Shepherd's purse, Capsella bursa pastoris, the bleeding stopper. It grows everywhere, and when they say everywhere, they mean it. Sidewalk cracks in London, gravel shoulders along highways in Kansas, construction sites in Seoul. It's one of the most globally distributed plants on Earth. A small, unassuming thing with a rosette of lobed basil leaves and tiny white flowers on thin stems. The seed pods are what give it its name. They're shaped like the small triangular purses that medieval shepherds carried at their belts. You can feel them between your fingers, thin and papery, like miniature valentines. The scent of the crushed plant is green, mild, and peppery. Unremarkable until you know what it does. Shepherd's purse has been used to stop bleeding for centuries across multiple continents. In traditional Chinese medicine, it's called ji kai and was used for hemorrhage and heavy menstruation. European herbalists prescribed it for the same purposes throughout the medieval and Renaissance periods. But the moment that should make you pay attention came during World War I. When pharmaceutical hemostatic supplies ran short, nurses on the front lines turned to shepherd's purse as a botanical backup for managing bleeding wounds. It wasn't a theoretical experiment. It was a field necessity. Research has since identified peptides in the plant with hemostatic properties alongside high levels of vitamin K, which plays a critical role in blood clotting. A study in the journal Phytotherapy Research noted its traditional use was supported by demonstrable coagulation effects. Midwives used it postpartum. Soldiers relied on it in trenches. And today it grows through the pavement outside pharmacies that sell synthetic clotting agents for $10 a tube. Shepherd's purse is like a field surgeon who never left the battlefield. Still working, still effective, still ignored by the hospital that replaced it. The pattern is becoming clear, isn't it? Common, dismissed, documented. And now we arrive at the one they tried to erase entirely. Mugwort, Artemisia vulgaris, the dream herb. This is one of the most controversial and misunderstood plants in the entire history of women's medicine. And the fact that most people have never heard of it is itself a kind of evidence. Mugwort grows tall along roadsides and riverbanks, reaching 3 to 5 feet with deeply lobed silvery green leaves that are smooth on top and covered in fine white hairs underneath. Rub a leaf between your fingers and you'll get a sharp, camphor-like scent with a hint of sage. Pungent, herbal, unmistakable. In traditional Chinese medicine, mugwort has been used for over 3,000 years, primarily in the practice of moxibustion, burning dried mugwort near acupuncture points to stimulate healing and most famously, to turn breech babies before birth. A Cochrane review, one of the gold standards of medical evidence review, found that moxibustion with mugwort at a specific acupuncture point significantly increased the likelihood of cephalic presentation compared to controls. In European traditions, mugwort was the wise woman's herb, used for menstrual regulation, digestive support, and dream enhancement. Its key compounds include thujone and cineole, which have demonstrated mild sedative and smooth muscle relaxing effects. Research has even explored its circadian rhythm interactions, with compounds showing potential to influence sleep cycles. But mugwort's real problem wasn't that it didn't work. It was that it worked in the hands of women who were operating outside formal medical authority. When wise women were branded as practitioners of witchcraft, their tools were branded with them. Mugwort went from sacred herb to superstition in the span of a few centuries. Not because the chemistry changed, because the politics did. Think of mugwort as the most experienced doctor in the room who got fired for not having the right credentials. The medicine didn't disappear, it just got forced underground. And that brings us to the bridge that connects everything so far. Here's what you need to understand. Midwifery is the longest continuously practiced clinical tradition in human history. For thousands of years, women tested plants on themselves and each other. They observed outcomes across pregnancies, illnesses, injuries, and recoveries. They refined protocols and passed them down, not through journals, but through apprenticeships, kitchen tables, and whispered instructions during labor. When modern medicine formalized itself through male-led institutions in the 18th and 19th centuries, it didn't just add knowledge, it subtracted it. It sidelined oral pharmacopoeias that women had maintained for millennia. Every plant you've encountered so far in this list was part of that erased library. And we're just getting started. If the plants you've seen so far, common, cheap, growing in cracks and gardens, carry this much validated power, wait until you see what's coming next. Because now we're moving into the ones that didn't just help. They changed outcomes. Cramp bark and black haw, nature's muscle relaxer duo, are two closely related plants that spent centuries being the primary answer to one of the most common forms of pain women experience, before a single pharmaceutical company entered the conversation. Both belong to the viburnum genus. Cramp bark, Viburnum opulus, is a tall, deciduous shrub with clusters of white flowers and bright red berries that hang like tiny lanterns in autumn. Black haw, Viburnum prunifolium, looks similar but tends to grow more tree-like, with darker, smaller fruits. You'll find cramp bark along stream banks and woodland edges in northern temperate regions. Black haw favors dry, rocky slopes in eastern North America. The bark of both plants, stripped and dried, releases a warm, slightly bitter, ear-woody scent, not unpleasant, just earthy and grounding. Multiple Native American nations used these plants specifically as antispasmodics, meaning they targeted involuntary muscle contractions, particularly uterine cramps. The Meskwaki used cramp bark for menstrual pain. The Cherokee used black haw to prevent miscarriage and ease labor pains. This wasn't casual use. These were specific prescriptions within structured healing traditions. The active compounds include vioputyl and scopolamine, both of which have demonstrated smooth muscle relaxing effects in pharmacological studies. Eclectic physicians in 19th century America, doctors who integrated botanical medicine into their practice, prescribed viburnum preparations so frequently for menstrual cramps and threatened miscarriage that they became staples of their pharmacopeias. Then ibuprofen arrived, and then prescription muscle relaxants. And then a whole generation of women never heard the word viburnum again. Not because the plants failed, but because a pill was faster, and a pill could be patented. The irony is that ibuprofen addresses pain through a completely different mechanism. It suppresses prostaglandins and inflammation, while cramp bark directly relaxes the muscle itself. They're not even doing the same job. One masks the signal, the other calms the source. And cramp bark and black haw together are like a two-person pit crew for a muscle in crisis. One steadies the engine, while the other loosens the bolts. And they've been growing at the edge of the woods this entire time, waiting for someone to remember what the Meskwaki already knew. Now we cross an ocean and enter a tradition so vast it could fill libraries. Dong Quai, Angelica sinensis, the female ginseng. This is one of those plants where the sheer weight of documented use should make anyone pause. Over 2,000 years of continuous prescription in traditional Chinese medicine. That's not folklore, that's a clinical track record longer than most modern medical institutions have existed. Dongquai grows in the cool, damp mountain regions of China, Japan, and Korea. It's a tall, elegant plant with large compound leaves and clusters of small white umbrella-shaped flowers, an unmistakable member of the carrot family. The root is what matters. Dried dongquai root has a warm, earthy, slightly sweet aroma with a peppery bite. Herbalists sometimes describe it as smelling like celery crossed with licorice. The texture when sliced is fibrous and dense, almost woody. In TCM, dongquai is classified as a blood tonic, meaning it's prescribed to nourish and move blood, particularly in formulas designed for women's health. It appears in the foundational formula Si Wu Tang, one of the most prescribed herbal combinations in East Asian medicine used for menstrual irregularity, anemia recovery, and postpartum restoration. The key active compounds include ligustolide, which has demonstrated anti-inflammatory and antispasmodic effects, and ferulic acid, a potent antioxidant that supports circulation. Studies published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology have confirmed its blood-nourishing and smooth muscle-relaxing properties. One clinical review noted dongquai's role in improving hemoglobin levels and supporting recovery from blood loss, aligning precisely with what TCM practitioners have documented for millennia. But here's where the cultural divide shows. Western medicine has been slow to integrate dongquai research, partly because it's typically used in multi-herb formulas rather than as an isolated compound, which doesn't fit the single-molecule clinical trial model. The system wasn't designed to evaluate a plant that works in partnership. That's not a flaw in the plant. It's a limitation in the testing framework. Dongquai is like a conductor who sounds flat when you isolate a single note, but creates a symphony when given an orchestra. And for over 2,000 years, the orchestra played beautifully. If you've been paying attention to the pattern, you already see it. The more powerful the plant, the harder it is for modern systems to categorize. And the easier it was to forget. Keep going, because this next one is the perfect example of that pattern. A plant so well studied in Europe that it's practically a pharmaceutical there, yet most Americans have never heard its name. Vitex, Vitex agnus castus, the hormone whisperer, also called chasteberry, and because medieval monks reportedly used it to suppress libido. That part is debatable. What isn't debatable is what it does for hormonal balance in women. Vitex grows as a small tree or large shrub in Mediterranean climates. It has graceful palmate leaves, finger-like, fanning out from a central point, and spikes of tiny purple-blue flowers that smell faintly peppery and warm. The dried berries are small, dark, and hard, with a sharp, almost black pepper flavor. Greek physicians prescribed Vitex for female reproductive conditions over 2,000 years ago. Hippocrates himself mentioned it. Dioscorides documented it. Throughout the medieval period, European herbalists used it for menstrual irregularity, PMS, and breast tenderness. Then modern pharmacology caught up, and what they found was remarkable. Vitex doesn't contain hormones. Instead, it acts on the pituitary gland, specifically through dopaminergic pathways, to help regulate the body's own production of prolactin and progesterone. It's not overriding the system, it's tuning it. German clinical trials, rigorous, randomized, placebo-controlled, demonstrated significant improvement in PMS symptoms, including irritability, mood swings, breast pain, and bloating. One landmark study in the British Medical Journal found that Vitex was nearly twice as effective as placebo for PMS symptom relief. The German healthcare system approved it as a standard treatment. Pharmacies in Germany stock it the way American pharmacies stock Midol, and yet in the United States, most women have never heard of it. The reason is simple and maddening. Vitex can't be patented. It's a plant. And without patent potential, there's no financial incentive for the kind of massive marketing campaign that turns a compound into a household name. So Vitex sits quietly on supplement shelves while synthetic alternatives dominate the conversation. It's like a world-class surgeon working at a free clinic, exceptional at the job, invisible to the system. The evidence is there, the tradition is there, the mechanism is understood. What's missing is the profit motive. If this is starting to shift how you see the world, if you're beginning to wonder what else is sitting right in front of you, documented and dismissed, good. That instinct is correct, and the next plant proves it in a way that might make you check your own garden. Evening primrose, Wenothera biennis, the skin healer, is one of those plants that sounds delicate but carries serious biochemical weight. You've probably seen it without knowing what it was. Evening primrose grows wild across North America, often along roadsides, in meadows, and at the edges of disturbed ground. It's a tall, upright plant with lance-shaped leaves and large, soft yellow flowers that open in the evening, hence the name, releasing a sweet, faintly lemon-like fragrance that attracts night-pollinating moths. The petals feel tissue paper thin between your fingers, almost translucent in the fading light. Native American peoples, including the Ojibwe and the Cherokee, used evening primrose as both food and medicine. The entire plant was consumed. Roots were eaten, leaves were applied as poultices for skin conditions, and the seeds were valued for their oil. That seed oil is where modern research focused, and what they found was gamma-linolenic acid, or GLA. GLA is an omega-6 fatty acid that the body uses to produce anti-inflammatory prostaglandins. Most people don't get enough of it from diet alone. Evening primrose oil became one of the most studied botanical oils of the 20th century, with research exploring its effects on breast tenderness associated with hormonal cycles, and eczema and atopic dermatitis, and hormonal skin changes. A study in the International Journal of Cosmetic Science found measurable improvements in skin moisture, elasticity, and roughness after supplementation with evening primrose oil. The evidence varies by condition. The data on eczema is stronger than for some other uses, but the overall profile is a plant that was food, medicine, and skincare in one package for indigenous peoples, and then got reduced to a single capsule on a supplement shelf. Evening primrose is like a complete skincare line growing for free in a roadside ditch. Cleanser, moisturizer, and anti-inflammatory, all in one organism. The stuff people pay $30 for in a bottle started in the dirt. Now here's where the history gets almost mythical. Vervain, Verbena officinalis, the enchantress herb, has been wrapped in more cultural reverence than almost any plant on this list. And that reverence spans continents and millennia. Vervain grows in dry, sunny spots, roadsides, field edges, waste ground, reaching about 2 feet tall with slender, branching stems and tiny lilac flowers clustered in thin spikes. The leaves are rough-textured, deeply lobed, and when crushed release a mild, slightly astringent scent that's hard to place. Not fragrant exactly, but green and sharp. The Druids considered vervain sacred, gathering it during specific celestial events. The Roman soldiers carried it as a purification herb and used infusions to wash battlefield wounds. Egyptian priests included it in temple rituals. In the medieval period, it appeared in nearly every major European herbal. Culpeper, Gerard, Hildegard of Bingen all documented it. The compound responsible for much of its medicinal action is verbenylin, an iridoid glycoside with demonstrated anti-inflammatory and mild sedative properties. But vervain also functions as a galactagogue, a substance that supports milk production in nursing mothers. Across European, African, and South American traditional systems, vervain was given to breastfeeding women to support lactation. One phytochemical review noted its notable nervine and galactagogue properties, confirming what 3 continents of mothers had already figured out. So why did it disappear from common knowledge? Because vervain got labeled as magical. When a plant's cultural associations include druids, temple rituals, and purification ceremonies, it's easy for a rationalist medical system to dismiss it as superstition, even when the chemistry supports the traditional use. The sacred reputation became the very thing that prevented it from being taken seriously. Vervain is like a brilliant scientist who also happened to be a poet. The poetry made people forget the science. But the verbenylin didn't care about labels. It kept working whether you called it sacred or not. And nursing mothers across 3 continents didn't need a clinical trial to know their milk came in stronger after the tea. If you're realizing how much knowledge has been hiding in plain sight, share this with someone who needs to see it. Because we're about to move into territory that gets even more powerful. Hibiscus subdurifa, the blood pressure flower, is hiding in every herbal tea aisle in every grocery store in the country, and almost nobody knows what it actually does. You've seen it. Those deep crimson, funnel-shaped flowers with velvety petals that stain your fingers red when you touch them. Dried, the calyces, the fleshy part beneath the petals, look like crinkled rubies. Steep them in hot water, and you get a ruby-red tea with a tart, air cranberry-like flavor, and a fragrance that's simultaneously floral and tangy. It's gorgeous, it's delicious, and it has clinical data that should make pharmaceutical companies nervous. In North Africa, hibiscus tea has been a daily staple for women for centuries, used for cooling the body, supporting digestion, and managing blood pressure. In the Caribbean, it's called sorrel and served at celebrations. In Ayurvedic tradition, hibiscus preparations support heart and reproductive health. The active compounds are primarily anthocyanins, the same class of pigments that make blueberries blue and red wine red, along with organic acids and polyphenols. These compounds have demonstrated vasodilatory and ACE inhibitory effects, meaning they help relax blood vessels and reduce the activity of an enzyme that raises blood pressure. Here's where it gets remarkable. A clinical trial conducted at Tufts University found that drinking 3 cups of hibiscus tea daily for 6 weeks produced statistically significant reductions in systolic blood pressure, comparable to some first-line pharmaceutical interventions. One research review stated that hibiscus showed clinically meaningful blood pressure reduction in pre-hypertensive and mildly hypertensive adults. That is a tea. A common, inexpensive, globally available tea. Ours producing results that rival medication in mild cases. Not replacing medication, but performing in the same range. And it costs approximately $2 for a box of 20 servings. The pharmaceutical alternative can cost $60 a month with a prescription. Hibiscus got overlooked because it was too ordinary, too accessible, and too associated with women's daily rituals to be taken seriously by systems that prioritize complexity and exclusivity. It's like a free public library sitting next to a university that charges $50,000 a year. The knowledge inside is comparable, but one has the prestige. This is the point where things start to shift beneath your feet. Every plant so far has been powerful on its own, but the next one comes from a tradition that treated plant medicine as something closer to engineering. Precise, multi-compound, cumulative. Our Schisandra berry, Schisandra chinensis, the five-flavor fruit, earned that name because Chinese medicine classifies it as containing all five fundamental tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and pungent. That's not a metaphor. Taste a dried Schisandra berry, and you'll experience an unusual cascade. Sour hits first, then sweet, then a trailing bitterness and warmth with a faint salty finish. It's disorienting and unforgettable. The berries grow in clusters on woody vines that climb through temperate forests in northeastern China, Korea, and Russia. They're small, bright red, and slightly translucent, like jeweled beads hanging from the canopy. The leaves are dark green and waxy, and the whole vine has a faintly resinous, citrus-like scent. In Chinese imperial tradition, Schisandra was reserved for royalty and the elite. Empresses used it for beauty, endurance, and longevity. But the most dramatic modern validation came from Russia. During the Cold War, Soviet researchers studied Schisandra extensively as part of their adaptogen research program, searching for natural compounds that could help soldiers and athletes perform under extreme stress without pharmaceutical side effects. They found that Schisandra's lignans, particularly Schisandrin B, supported liver detoxification, enhanced mental focus, and improved the body's resistance to physical and psychological stress. Studies published in Russian pharmacological journals documented improvements in work capacity, accuracy, and stress resilience. More recent research has confirmed its hepatoprotective effects, its antioxidant capacity, and its potential benefits for skin elasticity through collagen support. Our review in the journal Molecules described Schisandra as possessing remarkable pharmacological diversity across multiple body systems. And there's the problem for the pharmaceutical model. Schisandra works on too many systems simultaneously. Modern drug design wants one molecule, one target, one mechanism. Schisandra offers a constellation of compounds acting in concert. It's too complex to patent, too multifaceted to simplify, and too effective to ignore. Schisandra is like a Swiss Army knife in a world that only funds research on single-blade knives. But empresses didn't need a clinical trial, they needed results. And for centuries, Schisandra delivered. Now hold that thought, because everything you've seen so far is about to look like the warm-up. We're entering the tier of plants that didn't just help women survive, they changed the course of modern medicine itself. Wild yam, Dioscorea villosa, the grandmother of the pill. If you remember only one plant from this entire list, this should be a strong contender, because the story of wild yam is the story of how women's traditional knowledge built one of the most consequential pharmaceutical inventions of the 20th century, and then got written out of its own history. Wild yam is a climbing vine with heart-shaped leaves that twist around support structures in the forests of eastern North America and Mexico. The vines are slender, almost delicate, and the leaves have distinctive parallel veins that arc from base to tip. The root, a thick, knobby tuber, is the medicinal part. Slice it open and you'll find a pale, starchy interior with a faintly bitter, earthy smell. Indigenous women in Mexico used wild yam preparations for menstrual pain and reproductive support for centuries. But the compound that changed the world was diosgenin, a steroidal saponin found in concentrated amounts in Mexican wild yam species. In the 1940s, a chemist named Russell Marker became obsessed with finding a cheap, plant-based source for steroid hormones. At the time, synthesizing progesterone was astronomically expensive. It required processing huge quantities of animal organs. Marker discovered that diastenin from wild yams could be converted into progesterone through a relatively simple chemical process. He traveled to Mexico, worked with local harvesters who already knew the plants, and produced progesterone from wild yam roots. That breakthrough, built directly on indigenous knowledge of which plants had hormonal activity, became the foundation for the synthetic progestins used in the first oral contraceptive. The birth control pill, approved in 1960, fundamentally reshaped women's autonomy, economic participation, and reproductive rights worldwide. And its molecular origin was a tuber that Mexican women had been using for generations. A review in the journal Economic Botany documented Marker's reliance on traditional indigenous knowledge as the starting point for his synthesis. The women who knew the plant was hormonally active were never credited in the pharmaceutical narrative. Wild yam is like the anonymous architect whose design became a skyscraper with someone else's name on it. The chemistry didn't appear in a lab, it appeared in a forest, in the hands of women who understood what the root could do. That's not a footnote, that's the foundation. And if you're feeling the weight of that, the realization that one of the most important drugs in modern history traces back to women's plant knowledge that was never acknowledged, good, hold that feeling. Because the next one carries the same gravity. White peony root, Paeonia lactiflora, the Empress's formula, is one of the most prescribed herbs in the history of traditional Chinese medicine. And unless you've studied East Asian herbalism, you've almost certainly never encountered it. White peony grows in temperate gardens and wild hillsides across China, producing large, luminous flowers, soft white to pale pink, with a delicate, sweet fragrance that's been compared to old roses. The petals feel like cool silk between your fingers. But the medicine is in the root, a dense, pale, starchy tuber that's sliced, dried, and decocted into formulas that have been prescribed continuously for over 1,000 years. White peony root is a foundational ingredient in Si Wu Tang, the four substances decoction, which is considered the oldest and most widely used women's blood formula in Chinese medical history. First documented around 900 CE, Si Wu Tang combines white peony with dong quai, rehmannia, and ligusticum to nourish blood, regulate menstruation, and support recovery from blood loss. It's been prescribed billions of times across centuries. Not millions, billions. The key compound in white peony is peoniflorin, a monoterpene glycoside that has demonstrated anti-inflammatory, antispasmodic, and immunomodulatory effects in modern research. Peoniflorin has been studied for its ability to influence hormonal pathways, and clinical trials have explored its potential for supporting women with polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, a condition that affects an estimated 1 in 10 women of reproductive age globally. A study published in Phytomedicine found that peoniflorin-rich peony preparations showed promise in improving hormonal markers associated with PCOS. Another review in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology documented its anti-inflammatory activity as comparable to some conventional treatments. And yet, in the West, white peony root remains almost completely unknown. It's not sold in mainstream pharmacies, it's rarely mentioned in women's health discussions. It's invisible, not because it lacks evidence, but because it belongs to a medical system that Western institutions have historically marginalized. Si Wu Tang has a longer clinical track record than aspirin. That's not an exaggeration, it's arithmetic. White peony root is like the world's most experienced specialist who happens to speak a language the hospital hasn't learned yet. The expertise is real, the barrier is cultural. And on the other side of that barrier, women have been recovering, or regulating and restoring for 1,000 years. Now, black cohosh, Actea rasmosa, the labor herb that became a menopause standard. This plant represents something rare in this list. A women's herb that actually broke through the pharmaceutical barrier, not all the way, but further than most. Black cohosh is a striking woodland plant native to eastern North America. It grows in rich, shaded forest floors. On sending up tall spires of small white flowers that can reach 5 feet, hence one of its common names, bugbane, because the flowers were once thought to repel insects. The leaves are large and compound, deeply toothed, and the root system, thick, dark, and knotted, is the medicinal part. Fresh black cohosh root has an earthy, slightly acrid smell, and the dried root tastes bitter and astringent. Algonquin and Cherokee women used black cohosh for menstrual pain, labor support, ear and recovery from childbirth. It was a foundational plant in indigenous women's medicine across the eastern woodlands. Eclectic physicians adopted it in the 19th century, prescribing it under the name black snake root for what they called female complaints, a catch-all that covered menstrual irregularity, labor difficulty, and menopausal symptoms. The key compounds are triterpene glycosides, including actine and simicifugicide, which research suggests may interact with serotonin receptors and modulate neurochemical pathways involved in thermoregulation. That's significant because hot flashes, the most commonly reported menopausal symptom, are fundamentally a thermoregulatory event. German clinical trials conducted in the late 20th century demonstrated that standardized black cohosh extracts significantly reduced menopausal symptoms including hot flashes, night sweats, and mood disturbances. The German healthcare system approved it as a first-line treatment for menopausal complaints. Products like Remifemin, based on black cohosh extract, have been sold in European pharmacies for decades. But even with this level of validation, indigenous use, eclectic medical tradition, German clinical approval, millions of units sold, black cohosh remains undervalued in the broader medical conversation. It's prescribed less often than hormone replacement therapy, despite having a different risk profile. It's available, but it isn't promoted. It crossed the barrier, but it didn't get a seat at the table. Black cohosh is like an immigrant who passed every exam, earned every credential, and still gets treated like a visitor. The roots know what they're doing. The system just hasn't fully acknowledged it. And now we arrive at the one that carries what might be the most extraordinary name in all of herbalism. Shatavari, Asparagus racemosus, she who possesses 100 husbands. That's the direct Sanskrit translation. And in a medical system that names plants based on their perceived function, that name tells you exactly how seriously Ayurvedic medicine took this plant's role in women's vitality. Shatavari grows across the Indian subcontinent in tropical and subtropical regions. It's a climbing thorny plant with delicate needle-like leaves. Yes, it's related to the asparagus you eat, but wilder, more vine-like, and far more revered. The roots are the medicine, clusters of tuberous, fleshy fingers that look almost like a bundle of pale carrots. Fresh, they have a mild, sweet, starchy scent. Dried and powdered, shatavari has a slightly sweet, yet earthy flavor that blends easily into warm milk, which is in fact the traditional Ayurvedic delivery method. For over 3,000 years, shatavari has been classified as the supreme female rejuvenative in Ayurveda. That's not a casual designation. In a system that categorizes thousands of medicinal plants with rigorous specificity, shatavari sits at the top of the women's health hierarchy. It was prescribed for lactation support, fertility enhancement, menstrual regularity, menopausal transition, and general vitality throughout every stage of a woman's reproductive life. The active compounds include steroidal saponins, particularly shatavarin, along with isoflavones and mucilage. Modern research has focused on its galactagogue properties, its ability to support milk production, with animal studies demonstrating significant increases in milk yield. A review in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology documented Shatavari's traditional use across multiple Ayurvedic texts and noted emerging evidence supporting its adaptogenic, antioxidant, and hormonal modulating effects. Clinical research is still catching up. Some uses have stronger evidence than others. Early studies suggest promise for stress resilience and reproductive support, but comprehensive human trials remain limited. What isn't limited is the weight of 3,000 years of continuous prescription by one of the world's oldest surviving medical systems. Shatavari is like the chief medical officer of an ancient hospital that's been operating without interruption for millennia. The paperwork is in a different language, but the outcomes speak for themselves. And the name, She Who Possesses 100 Husbands, isn't about romance. It's about vitality so robust it could sustain abundance. That's what Ayurveda believed women deserved: power, not frailty. And they built an entire pharmacological tradition around making sure they had it. Now, as we approach the final act, the pattern should be undeniable. These plants weren't marginal, they weren't quaint. They were central to the health systems that kept women alive, recovering, and strong for thousands of years across every inhabited continent. And they were systematically sidelined, not because they stopped working, but because the systems that valued them were replaced by systems that couldn't profit from them. We've traveled through meadows, forests, imperial gardens, and battlefield trenches. We've seen plants that tone the uterus, calm the heart, stop bleeding, balance hormones, lower blood pressure, and give rise to one of the most consequential pharmaceuticals in history. And every single one of them was carried, tested, refined, and preserved primarily by women. Now we arrive at the herb that might represent the most uncomfortable truth on this entire list. Rue, Ruta graveolens, the herb of grace. Rue grows as a small, woody, blue-green shrub with deeply divided leaves that look almost feathery, like finely cut lacework. Crush a leaf and you'll get a sharp, acrid, unforgettable scent. Bitter, penetrating, almost chemical in its intensity. The small yellow flowers are unassuming. But the plant's presence in a garden is unmistakable once you know that smell. And its presence in women's medical history is equally unmistakable and far more fraught. Rue is one of the most frequently documented plants in the entire history of female reproductive autonomy. Ancient Greek physicians prescribed it. Roman women used it. Medieval herbals detailed it. Renaissance-era texts referenced it. It appears in legal records, religious edicts, and pharmacopoeias, spanning nearly every century of Western civilization. The reason rue was so heavily documented is precisely the reason it was so heavily suppressed. It was used as an emmenagogue, a substance to bring on menstruation, and in stronger preparations, it was understood to have abortifacient potential. The active compounds include coumarins and the alkaloid arborine, along with volatile oils that can stimulate uterine contractions. Let's be very clear here. This is not a recommendation. Rue contains compounds that are genuinely dangerous in improper doses, causing severe gastrointestinal distress, kidney damage, and serious harm. This is a plant that demands respect, caution, and context. But the history matters. For centuries, rue gave women a measure of reproductive agency in societies where they had virtually none. It was the quiet knowledge passed between women in kitchens and gardens when no other option existed. And it was systematically targeted, banned, controlled, and morally condemned, not because it was dangerous, but because it was effective in a domain that patriarchal systems sought to control. Rue is the most politically charged plant on this list. Its story isn't comfortable, and it shouldn't be, but erasing it from the conversation means erasing a central chapter of women's medical history and the botanical knowledge that accompanied it. Think of rue as a skeleton key that women kept hidden for millennia. Too dangerous to use casually, too important to forget. The herb of grace wasn't named for gentle blessings. It was named for the mercy it offered when nothing else would. Evidence varies on its other traditional uses. Some herbalists also prescribed it for headaches, digestive complaints, and eye strain. But its place in women's history is unique and indelible. Handle the knowledge the way you'd handle the plant, carefully, respectfully, and with full awareness of its power. And now, at the end of this journey, after the forgotten midwife herbs, the dismissed healers, the erased traditions, and the hidden architects of modern medicine, we arrive at the plant that brings everything full circle: red clover, Trifolium pratense, the field pharmacy. You know this plant. You've known it your entire life. It's the one with the round, On fuzzy pink-purple flower heads that children pick in meadows. The one that bees love. The one that grows in every field, every roadside, every patch of unmowed lawn from Maine to Montana and across Europe, Asia, and beyond. The leaves are the classic three-part clover shape, each leaflet marked with a pale chevron. Pull a flower head apart and you'll find dozens of tiny individual florets, sweet-scented, mildly honey-like. Put one in your mouth and you'll taste a faint, pleasant sweetness. This is a plant so common, so ordinary, so thoroughly part of the background of everyday life that the idea of it being medicine sounds absurd. Until you look at the chemistry. Red clover is rich in isoflavones, plant-based compounds that interact with estrogen receptors in the body. The 4 primary isoflavones in red clover, genistein, didzane, formononetin, and biochanin A, have been the subject of extensive research into menopausal symptom management, bone density support, and cardiovascular health. A meta-analysis published in the journal Maturitas found that red clover isoflavone supplementation was associated with significant improvements in hot flash frequency and severity. Research has also explored its potential for supporting bone mineral density in postmenopausal women, addressing osteoporosis, which affects an estimated 200 million women worldwide. Victorian folk medicine traditions in England used red clover as a cancer remedy, applying poultices to external tumors. While that specific application hasn't been validated, modern researchers have studied its isoflavones for potential chemopreventive properties, and the interest continues. Red clover was never a hidden, rare, or exotic plant. It was never locked away in imperial gardens or restricted to elite herbalists. It grows everywhere. It asks for nothing. It's been under your feet your entire life, quietly producing the same isoflavones that pharmaceutical companies now extract, concentrate, and sell for significant markups. And that is perhaps the most perfect encapsulation of everything this list has tried to show you. The most powerful plants weren't always the rarest. They were often the most common, so common they became invisible, so associated with women's daily health routines that they were dismissed as quaint, old-fashioned, or irrelevant, so impossible to patent that no company had an incentive to remind you they existed. Red clover is the final proof that the pharmacy was never missing. It was never locked away. It was growing in the field behind your house, in the vacant lot on your block, in the meadow you drove past this morning without a second thought. Every plant on this list was real. Every use was documented. Every compound was identified. The chemistry didn't change. The attention did. There's a crumbling stone wall somewhere, could be in Baltimore, could be behind a cottage in the English countryside, could be in the alley behind your own apartment. Motherwort is pushing through the cracks. Red clover is blooming at its base. Evening primrose is opening its yellow petals as the sun goes down. The knowledge those plants carry stretches back thousands of years, across continents, through the hands of women who were never credited but never stopped practicing. Next time you walk past a patch of flowering weeds, you'll feel it, that shift. The one where what used to look like nothing starts to look like everything. A library, a lineage, a pharmacy written by women, growing where no one thought to look. Not because it was hidden, because you hadn't learned the language yet. Now you have.